Well, and there's one gentleman we want to check in with right now who's got some comments on it and may be in a position to do something about it. Joining us now on America's Forum, it's our privilege to welcome in United States Senator from the state of Wisconsin, Republican Ron Johnson. Ron, you're very gracious with your time. Thanks so much for coming back here with us on America's Forum.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing okay, but disturbed by this IRS story. Ron, in my days in the House, my first years on the Ways and Means Committee, we heard about the IRS wasting millions of dollars on a computer system that did not work. But in terms of egregious government conduct, this latest report about workers who have not paid their taxes receiving bonuses, or those with disciplinary problems receiving bonuses in the millions of dollars, it would seem to say to me, at long last, it's time for civil service reform. What can the U.S. Senate do to bring IRS and, for that matter, other government employees in line?
Well, of course, under Harry Reid, the U.S. Senate will do nothing. There's not a whole lot of curiosity in the United States Senate run by the Democrats in any of these government scandals. And, of course, this is just one additional outrage. And, you know, they're countless, J.D. One of my messages, certainly been to the constituents of Wisconsin, is believe what your eyes and ears are telling you about the federal government. It is dysfunctional. It is broken. Then ask yourself a pretty simple series of questions. Do you really want the federal government to continue to grow? Do you want its intrusion control over your life to increase? Do you really want to take over your health care system? So Americans have got to take a look at just one more example of outrageous behavior of the federal government, one more example of total dysfunction. And they got to stop sending politicians to Washington dedicated to growing the place.
And as was pointed out earlier, one of the reasons for Reid's reticence, indeed it may be prescribed statutorily, is the fact that no action can be taken against these IRS employees unless their union approves of disciplinary action. Now, again, Ron, during my days in the House, people would come to see me about government unions gone wild, and they would say, if there's a grievance against a federal employee and you go through the hearings process, most of those federal employees have up to 6 years to exhaust their hearings. And as you're well aware, 6 years, that's the length of a term in the United States Senate. How do we rein in these bureaucratic unions, Ron?
You know, J.D., private sector unions, I think, have a place and they're justified. Public sector unions never should have occurred. Of course, that happened really back in Wisconsin with Gaylord Nelson. Then John F. Kennedy made public sector unions legal for the federal government. It's a really bad idea because the unions have an unholy alliance with the politicians. They spend all of their dues getting to elect. So now you've got a politician elected by public sector union dues going across the bargaining table. You think that's a fair bargain? As a result, you're bankrupting municipalities, you're bankrupting states, we're bankrupting the federal government.
Ron, before we get back to the political and public policy issues at hand today, I'm just kind of curious. You and I had a chance to sit down face to face when you were relatively new to the United States Senate, and of course you pulled a big victory, retiring Russ Feingold a few years ago. Now that you've had some time in the United States Senate, what has been the greatest lesson you have learned personally in terms of serving in what some call the world's most exclusive club?
Well, you know, J.D., look at I just mentioned governmental dysfunction. It's exemplified in the United States Senate, where the Senate, the greatest deliberative body supposedly in the world, hasn't passed an appropriation bill in more than 2 years. You know, I'm not sure the exact count because we might have gotten a couple of votes on amendments this year, but between July 13th and the end of the year, Republicans had received 4 roll call votes on Republican amendments. This is supposed to be in this great deliberative debate body. And so the United States Senate under Harry Reid is utterly dysfunctional, which is why it's one of the primary reasons we have to get a majority of Republicans so we can at least get the Senate functioning the way our founders intended.
And Ron, on that bit of political contention, yesterday the Republican National Committee released a blistering memo entitled "Nothing's Too Unethical for Harry Reid." Now, I realize that in the Senate, senatorial courtesy is something that is highly prized, but do you expect that any of your colleagues or the Ethics Committee will take a look at some of the recent reports about Harry Reid and some of his questionable actions, both with campaign funds and with family members in positions lobbying on sensitive issues, not to mention his own insult to the people of Nevada with what has gone on out at the Bundy Ranch. Will anyone seek action against Harry in the Ethics Committee?
Certainly. I'm pushing certainly Republicans to highlight Harry Reid as Exhibit A of why we have to get a majority in the Senate. And, I certainly want to know how Harry Reid became a millionaire in public service. And you talked about authorial courtesy. Senator Harry Reid doesn't show it very often. And in particular, what I took huge offense to is when he stood on the floor of the Senate and basically called the citizens of Wisconsin and of America a bunch of liars. These individuals are writing us and emailing us with their heart-wrenching stories about how harmful Obamacare has been to their lives, and yet Harry Reid got up before the Senate and called all those people saying they were lying, basically calling them liars. That was, I think, one of his greatest outrages, again, in an almost innumerable number of outrages by this man.
Now, it has been interesting to see the actions you have taken, mentioning Obamacare, and of course Harry Reid saying that these were flights of fantasy or something worse. But Ron, you've taken a step with a lawsuit, and if there's been something that's unified the Republican conference within the United States Senate, my old friend and erstwhile opponent John McCain is signing on, Ted Cruz on the right, in terms of joining you in this lawsuit. Has your effort there been the unifying force you hoped it would be in the United States Senate for the Republican conference?
Well, I think we're seeing that because, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum in terms of Republicans, people are realizing what a danger to our democracy this president has become. We've certainly seen executive and presidential authority grow over the decades, but under this president, even Jonathan Turley, who's a very liberal law professor at Georgetown, a big Obama supporter, testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee saying that we're at a tipping point. We're at a constitutional crisis because of this president's unilateral governance. America, we didn't choose to be ruled by kings or House of Lords. We should be a nation of laws. And this president, who supposedly was a constitutional law professor, shows no regard to the Constitution whatsoever. So at the heart, that is really the primary purpose of my lawsuit, is to get the judiciary to get involved in these extremely important constitutional issues of separation of power, and a president that is showing no restraint, no respect for the Constitution or the laws. And by the way, a law that he is changing, that it's his duty to faithfully execute. He signed the law, and he's changed by himself.
Ron, you mentioned the court action you've taken. You mentioned your concerns about the president and his unconstitutional overreach. A while back, he rather infamously talked about the fact that he had a pen and a phone in terms of issuing executive orders. I'm just wondering, do you expect him, for example, on the question of amnesty, what some in the politically correct movement call comprehensive immigration reform, do you expect him to try to use a type of pardon power or a type of amnesty in that regard with a unilateral executive order?
He's already done with some immigration laws, just failing to enforce them. It's one of the points that Jonathan Turley made in his testimony before the House. And again, Jonathan Turley is not a conservative; he's a liberal. And so there are a lot of people that recognize that what this president is doing is just an assault on our Constitution, on our republic, and it has to be checked. And the judiciary has largely been absent in these separation of powers issues, and they have got to get involved. And that is why it's just crucial, and why I'm so happy that 38 of my Republican colleagues joined me in an amicus brief to my lawsuit to hopefully obtain standing, so that this one instance where a member of Congress should be able to obtain standing, this lawsuit can actually get that judicial review. It's just crucial for our democracy.
Ron, about a minute left, and obviously in the Senate you have a special constitutional role in terms of foreign policy, in terms of the ratification of treaties. I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the stationing or the rotating of troops, some 600 troops into Poland and the Baltic nations. Is this a wise move at this juncture, given the Russian adventurism in the Ukraine?
Yeah, JD, I think we probably need to do more. I heard Vice President Biden earlier say it's enough talk, time for action. He was talking to Putin. I'm saying that to President Obama. We have got to act. We have to show strength. We have to show resolve, because Vladimir Putin is massing tens of thousands of troops on Ukrainian's border, and we're sending a couple hundred. Again, I'm not saying that we need to engage in military action here, but we need to support freedom-seeking people. The incredibly courageous Ukrainians that stood up and protested for a government free of corruption. We need to support people like that, and if we don't, Vladimir Putin is going to continue his expansion with impunity, and that is not good for world peace. It's really not good for world order and a strong economy.
Well, Senator Ron Johnson, you have been very gracious with your time. We appreciate your perspective on all these important issues, and we look forward to visiting with you again very soon here on America's Forum. Thanks very much, Ron.
Have a great day.
You too, sir. So you hear where Senator Johnson stands. Your thoughts on the use of American military. Says he doesn't want troops involved in combat, but what should be the proper role of America's forces in the Balkans? We'll answer that question. Get your comments coming up at these social sites on Newsmax TV.